This is the farmhouse where I grew up, where my father grew up, where my grandfather grew up, where my great-grandfather grew up. The main house was built in 1860. We got electricity in 1943 with the Rural Electrification Act. And now what I am doing is I'm removing the majority of the 1960 updates and reverting the era back to somewhere between 1920 and 1950. I'm going to show you each room in the order that I did them years ago. While I am no more of a carpenter or a designer than any member of my family has ever been, I'm doing it to suit me and my tastes. With the basic room of the lab finished, we started filling it with equipment. I prefer 1940s to 1950s equipment. Why? Because by the time you hit the 60s, the quality starts going downhill. And today, the stuff is crap. So we started with a nice World War II cabinet that they were going to toss out at work. And as you can see, it didn't take very long to fill it. Then we needed some ceiling lights. So I purchased some good used 1930s, 40s vintage gas station lights. And here you can see that I've got them clamped to the ceiling beam, trying to decide exactly where I want to place them. And this is what they look like lit with a Cree or Cray, however you pronounce it, 100 watt LED light in 6500K. For the ceiling, we chose plastic Tuftex Seacoaster in opaque white by Undura. We ripped down 3/4 inch planks into 3/4 by 3/4 strips, and then we painted them in Valspar 6011-1 fired earth to sort of match the old beams. And these strips would hold the ceiling up. We would take a strip of the ceiling and slide it into the slot between the 3/4 strip and the insulation and just slide it into position. And here you can see the entire ceiling is finished and the light is installed and wired. And we even acquired an old style exit light for going out into the generator room. Next acquisition was what we call a project table. It's a World War II vintage metal rolling table with a slide out extension. The top was rusty, so we sanded it and primed it. And then we gave it a coat of modern OD paint. Obviously, it's not the same as World War II OD, but that's what was available locally in a rattle can. And with that slid into position next to the big cabinet, we installed a Harbor Freight vise, and we had just enough room to slide in a World War II vintage file cabinet. Now, why World War II as opposed to the modern stuff? You can pull every drawer out loaded with a World War II vintage file cabinet, and it won't tip over. A modern cabinet is so light and cheap that if you pull one out all the way at the top and the bottom is not heavy enough with other stuff in the drawers, it will try to tip over. Again, this stuff was procured at work that they were throwing out, all the old stuff. Since we were going to be using the lab for restoring some old kerosene appliances, we needed a buffing station. Harbor Freight supplied the buffer, but we needed a place to mount it. So from Rockler, we got their heavy-duty blind shelf supports, and you can see here that they're mounted on the wall. This is a close-up of what they look like. For the shelf to hold the buffer, we used the strip of the maple countertop that we had cut off. And as you can see, we drilled a hole and then chiseled a square for the plate of the Rockler support. Here's both sides fully machined and ready to go. Then the maple is slid onto the supports, and it's basically you just pound it in with a big hammer and a block until it's flush with the wall. And here is the buffing station fully set up with a brass wheel on the left with a buffing wheel on the right and a vintage, maybe World War II or so, work light. And then we painted the door to the generator room Rust-Oleum Light Machine Gray. And then, of course, to keep track of all the bits and bobs and hardware that's required for proper restoration of the kerosene equipment, we bought this organizer and mounted it on the wall. And then finally, for a light directly over our workbench, we've got this 1950s triple articulated light. Now, the reason why we chose the 1950s version is the modern ones have switch problems and the switches go up. As you can see here, the head has two lights. It's got a Cray LED in the center with a fluorescent circle line bulb surrounding it. And this is what it looks like when both are on. So you can have harsh LED or you can have soft circle line fluorescent. Depends on what you want. And that is how we built our kerosene lab.